Here we are on the final day of IBC 2024, and if there's one topic that's come up in all of the conversations that I've had, both here in the studio at the Bedrock streaming stand and off stand with everybody here, it's about scale, it's about efficiency, and it's about making sure that the contribution to the bottom line is as effective as possible at this point in time in our sector. For the final interview of the OTTRed IBC series, I'm going to be speaking with somebody that's going to be telling us about the perspective from an organisation that's on the lips of everybody here. AWS is powering so much of our sector, and we've got Ian Munford here in the studio, the strategic development lead, to talk to us about scalability. Ian, welcome to the studio.
Absolute pleasure to be here.
I've been looking forward to this conversation because, although it was a very complimentary introduction, it's absolutely true. It's very rare for me to have a conversation, Ian, where the acronym AWS doesn't come into the conversation. So we're going to be talking about scaling the future. You know, and for one organisation to play such an intrinsic part of what that might constitute for so many organisations is a massive thing. You know, AWS feels like the heartbeat organisation of the sector.
I mean, we are grateful to be able to work with a number of our customers, but actually it's interesting because the sort of breadth of how we look at a market is gives us an opportunity to think very broadly about some of these sort of fundamental, challenges facing our industry. And it's interesting because scale or scaling services has ever been, challenging for the industry, and the industry typically has responded to, for example, big growth or big audience growth for sports streaming, for example. I mean, if you look at the records going on around the world, and they continue to increase. However, what's interesting is as our markets transition from what is predominantly a linear sort of service, a linear TV service today, to what will be effectively a predominantly IP service in the sort of years to come. The concept of scaling dramatically changes, and I just want to kind of give you some perspective on that. So there was a really interesting bit of research done by the EBU. It's well worth reading, and they've been thinking about this sort of concept of how do we move these sort of great big massive TV audiences at peak from a technology which is broadly suited to that. I mean, obviously it has some limitations, but broadly suited to big audiences to IP. And it was interesting because the study which EBU did, and they wanted to illustrate the sort of scale of the problem, and they suggested for the German market, using a very conservative view of peak viewing, so sort of one device per household, that the increase in just bits being delivered would be 5x what we've ever seen before, and that's just for TV. That's not including software gaming, software downloads, all that kind of stuff. And they did this brilliant little calculation, and to me it kind of just really drives home the sort of challenge that's sort of facing us coming forward. And they said it's a 5x increase from anything we've ever seen in the Frankfurt Internet Exchange today. And that's just TV, right? So it goes from 14-ish terabits per second to 76 at peak. And so these figures are mind-boggling, right? And the reality is that as an industry, not just AWS, but as an industry, we need to think about how we transition our audiences from one service to another, delivering great stories, but at the same time thinking through some of these gnarly problems.
In such a fast-moving industry as well, where the brand is seen, at least to an extent, as a North Star
Yeah.
of intelligence. You just mentioned that report from the EBU.
Yeah.
The footprint of your accountability within AWS is Europe, right? You're looking at
global,
Europe.
but
Okay.
I mean, I'm based here, so I think there's a lot that we can. Europe's an interesting market in many respects. So, it has obviously a lot of countries within sort of single time zones, and actually this sort of concept of scaling within a single time zone, you'll see how that kind of creeps in later on. There's also variable infrastructure, right? So you've got different countries that have different types of infrastructure across the EBU, and also what's very, very apparent is that different European countries will transition their viewing habits in different ways and at different timescales. So the markets are moving at different speeds, and so in many ways, Europe actually gives us a really interesting litmus test for the rest of the world.
Yeah, when we spoke before, Ian, and you mentioned this time zone thing, I'm constantly having conversations with people all over the world, different dimensions of the industry, and fairly regularly they'll offer up a gem of wisdom like the one that you mentioned when we last spoke around the time zone implication. Unpack that one for people who are viewing and listening.
It's simply that the acute challenge of scale is not dissipated across multiple time zones. Perhaps some countries in the world that straddle different time zones, you can sort of smooth out the problem.
Yeah.
In Europe, single country, single time zone, everything happens at the same time, and that just magnifies the problem, right? So the kind of things which our broadcasters, for example, are dealing with. I just take a football match, right? A national football match that captures the imagination. Just think of the sheer loading, just basic loading required to deliver a flawless event in that single time zone, right? So I mean, it just creates more challenges.
I had one of the productions that I run is called The Download, about the streaming industry, for the streaming industry, by the streaming industry. And I spoke to someone in the Middle East last week for an article on that, and they told me that the amount of bandwidth pressure that is put onto networks when a new game is released. You spoke about gaming and the EBU survey, the report that was done. Unbelievable. Much more pressure than prime time or live when a new game's released. I mean, I know that from my own household when my 13-year-old's doing a 7-hour download.
Well, what's interesting is that if you look at the figures, and it's, we talk about the transition, and there's lots of positives to that, which I'd like to cover off as well. But there's a number of different facets to this sort of what does the future of TV even look like, right? Are we going to be watching scheduled channels over IP? Probably not, because I mean the current way, the current technology does that very, very well. TV is going to look very different in the future. However, as people, as viewers, when we think about our hours of entertainment, whether it's live, whether it's not live, on demand, not on demand, roughly speaking, the peak of viewing is still going to remain, right? So we come home from work, we want to kind of relax, we want to, right? So there's a lot of people saying, well, we shouldn't worry about it because it's going to be on demand. Well, yeah, I mean, that helps, right? But it's still going to be a lot of on demand at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the same time zone.
Yeah, absolutely. You just mentioned there's a lot of positives. One of the things I'd like to try and extract, selfishly for myself, but for anyone watching or listening to this podcast, if you had to list the challenges and opportunities that you see at the moment, how would that list fall?
Yeah, so I think if we start with the positives, so I think moving entertainment, let me call it that. Moving storytelling to an IP world offers, a range of opportunity, right? So, for example, we're all very familiar with concepts like personalization, being able to, have a range of ancillary services running, maybe some gamification if you're watching a reality show or whatever, right? So if you look at the likes of what Sky and other broadcasters in Europe are doing in that particular space, it's fascinating, and it's a really fast-moving area. So I think in terms of being able to engage and deliver a compelling experience for viewers and audiences, IP offers a range of ops. But I think then the sort of the spectre of the challenge comes in. So whilst this is a great opportunity to reinvent and re-envisage how we engage with our viewers, one of the challenges, and it's well described in the industry, is the challenge of profitability for IP delivered services, right? So, and there's lots of reasons for that. I mean, we won't have time to go into all of them, but there's well documented views on this. So there's scale matters, right? So audience scale matters. There's challenges around cost of production, cost of delivery, etc. So I think one of the things as an industry that we really need to be thinking about is, okay, great. There's a golden opportunity for us to engage properly with our audiences, properly with our viewers, deliver something which is compelling and drives the engagement we're looking for. But we've got to start thinking very seriously about the way that we're working and how we drive sustainable profitability. So it's a word which I often use. We've got to sustain the industry. So it's pointless going down a path where, the industry can't follow. Yeah. That doesn't help anybody.
Scale can mean a lot of different things, can't it, Ian? To an extent, it sounds like a very forensic word, but actually it's very subjective. Scale can mean many things to many end users and organisations that are dependent on your services, but also to you guys. When you dimension what scale might represent to the industry and then also to the provision of your services, where's your head on that consideration?
Yeah, I mean, we continue. So obviously we have a great relationship with many customers around the world, and scale, again, because the breadth of what we do means different things. So at a basic level, being able to scale streaming, right? So working very collaboratively with our customers, thinking about if they are running a major event, how we help them scale delivery, just basic stuff. Working with partners like Bedrock and helping them think through how they scale services in their own back end. Just think of the volume of people hitting a website or a player which Bedrock's running. We've got to think through some pretty
massive numbers,
complex figures, right? They are mind-boggling, and we have some really deep expertise along with Bedrock, and so it amazes me every time I kind of use one of these services, and it's like we just expect it to work, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
It
needs to, right? That's the expectation.
I remember I ran very early days streaming services in about 2003. And we were getting excited when we had like 20 people, 30 people watching a football match. These days you're talking multiple millions, right? And you've got it. So it's just a magnitude. So scale means very, very different things, and just good, solid planning, good, solid execution, good, solid testing means that these services work.
Yeah, that dependability as a fundamental, foundational aspect of what you guys provide, I think, is inherent when you look towards a North Star brand like AWS. But inevitably there are nuances with each solution that you put together, different countries, different regulatory environments, for example. What's your interpretation of the more complicated end of solutions that you pull together? What makes something complicated?
So, I mean, in some respects, a lot of the services that we're providing, core infrastructure to sort of power a lot of the capabilities that companies like Bedrock develop. The complexity really starts to come in when we think about the upstream and downstream impacts. I'll try and illustrate that point. So thinking about, for example, localization, right, of content. So when you think about taking a TV show and you're I don't know, maybe seeing an opportunity to monetize or create more value in a different country. Just the sheer complexity of taking this, what used to be a very linear, almost static process, and now operating in a completely dynamic market,
with a
dynamic market,
stack.
and all of that sort of complexity of the workflow. I mean, we're literally reimagining how something comes from a camera to a screen. I mean, literally, the entire process needs to be reimagined. And so complexity, technically, is something that certainly AWS and others, many others have been doing for many, many years. Now the complexity is having to think through how these different processes are evolving, what are the touch points. There's a North Star which we work towards in AWS, and that is the Movie Labs 2030 vision. It may not be something that everybody over here is familiar with, but what it does is it sets out from not necessarily on the distribution end, but what it does is it sets out some very, very clear principles of how we as an industry should be thinking about working. And there's a number of principles. There's 10 in total. I won't go through them all. But there's a couple which really ring true to me. And the first one is that in this hugely complex environment that we operate, you've got to rethink how you. You've got to really rethink how you operate a workflow. And so the principle number one, which Movie Labs define, is we need to start bringing applications and services to the content, not the other way around. Now, that one, just think about what that really means, okay, and think about the way we operate today. So we are going to bring applications and services to the content, not the other way around. So what they're describing is the fact that today we'll move, a movie or a TV program or whatever it happens to be, we'll move that program to a service like localization, or to an application editing, or to a bunch of different vendors in the market who are then going to do things to it. Reverse it. They come to the content, leave the content where it is. And you can then start to really think about that breadth of opportunity that IP starts to offer. So I'll give you an example. I use localization again. So rather than moving, let's say, a TV program out to a third-party localization company, if that localization company can actually interact with with that content in the cloud in real time, without having to move stuff about, A, you're saving time, B, there's no complexity because you can get rid of things like having to do multiple quality control checks. So it just takes cost and it just takes complexity out of that process. So that's one which we use as a North Star. So Movie Labs principle number one is bring applications and services to the content, not the other way around. And there's another principle which I find quite interesting, which describes distribution as a publishing function, right? So really, again, what they're describing is moving the essence or the metadata associated with content, rather than, again, having to shift this entire file somewhere else. So it's just really turning the industry on its head and thinking of workflow in a modern way.
It's really interesting. I'm not going to ask you to comment on it, Ian, but one of the themes that many people are talking about at IBC this year is the number of collaborations that we can see across the market, and how they might well be the incubation of M&A activity.
Yep.
And actually what you've just described might be another thing that accentuates that M&A activity, because the amount of space on the horizon that there simply is, especially when more and more of these things are moving into the cloud.
Well, I think just at a more basic level, it gives the opportunity for really innovative companies coming through with different ideas to show to deliver in a safe way, in a much safer way, an impact, right? There's a company, one of our partners, called Flawless AI, and if you haven't come across those guys, well worth a look. And some of the things that they're actually doing using AI to localize content. They've got a service called TrueSync. It's just off the chart, right?
I'll definitely check that out.
But yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But to actually to bring that to the world. I mean, we're not just talking about a sort of somebody working just in a location somewhere in the US or somewhere else around the world. Now they can actually bring that service to the world
through AWS. Wrap us up, Ian. Talk about what you see happening and where. Either the close proximity type things that we should expect over the next 90 to 180 days. There might be some quite profound things. Or even further out, what are the milestones that we should all be looking out for that might be the navigation points on the journey of this sector?
So I think there's some interesting things about to happen, and it's I'll use the UK as a great example. So Ofcom actually in 2024 released a paper, and it's open to anybody to read. And it's a really interesting paper because effectively they're making a couple of statements. So the first one is they're saying we don't want to, and I fundamentally believe in this. There is this sort of transition happening within the certainly the TV space. And what they don't want to do is leave anybody behind, because if you leave these big changes to market forces, right, you do have the danger of leaving people behind, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So they're gonna, and I think it's such a bold move by UK to say, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to give people a timetable. Right, we're gonna make a very clear statement. We don't know what that is. They're gonna be providing more detail in 2025. We're gonna give you a sense of at a regulatory level and a governmental level of what that market is going to look like, the timescales under which that will happen, and I think that's a really positive move, because now, instead of guesswork, the industry actually will have something to aim at.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing we are really great at as an industry, if we have a clear direction, we will mobilize, and we will absolutely deliver a fantastic fantastic experience for the audience. Fundamentally, that's what it's all about.
Agreed.
Delivering a great experience for the audience. So the first thing which I'm really going to be watching for is what Ofcom in the UK publishes. And I hope that we see, and we are starting to see, other countries follow suit, right? So certainly within Europe, and that will give us clear direction as an industry, some clear timescales, so we can start planning and we can start thinking about some of these big, gnarly challenges that we've been talking about today.
Yeah. Ian, thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure.
For coming in and enlightening me and anybody watching or listening. The OTTRed Spotlight podcast, sponsored by Bedrock on their stand here at IBC 2024. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you in the run-up to this event and then meet you here in Amsterdam. Thanks so much, Ian.
Thanks for having me.